All right, everybody. What's going on? Let's get started. All right. We'll give everybody a chance to get in. I'll probably have to shut this window. Hang on. All right. There was a lot of noise out there. All right. We're doing coffee tonight. All right, guys. Let's see. How long until this thing actually... Hello, Ray. All right. Let me know. Mic check. Do you guys hear me? Do you guys see me? Okay, that's what matters to me. I got a fan going on over here. If it's loud and it's making the microphone choppy, you need to let me know, so I'll shut it off. Well, that's good, Sam. I'm very glad. Yes. Yes to what? What question are you answering? I asked like 6 questions. Okay, no problem, Ray. Tell that's fine. Can do. Yes to yes. We can hear you. Sam spelled here wrong. We can hear you and see you. Thank you, Brody. Okay. All right, let's go. We'll go in order of what people are asking. So what I'm going to do is make myself a list so I don't really forget what we're doing here. Let me go ahead and get our list put up here on the board. No good. Hang on. Nope. One more time. Better. Okay. So I'm going to get my list put up on the board here. So we had a request to do Dar al-Islam as well as the Ottomans more generally. We had a request for Latin American independence, post-colonialism, colonialism. We could do that. We had a request for, let's see, Indian Ocean trade. We can do that. Japan and Korea. Brandon, do me a favor. Let me know, like, how... what do you mean? That's a pretty broad category, man. So let me know what you mean by that. Japan and Korea. When, how, which parts, like let me know. Matthew's asking for Haitian Revolution, which is going to be basically put into the idea of looking at Latin American independence because it's part of that. Let's see. More Latin American independence. Caroline wants to do Green Revolution. We can do that. Ray wants gunpowder empires. Well, remember the Ottomans are part of that, so we'll probably hit that as we're doing the Ottomans. Thank you, Ray. I know who you mean. And Abbasids, I forgot everything about that. Well, that's a lot. All right, so basically Ray wants all of Islam from the beginning to the end. And Japan and Korea, 1750-1900 political and foreign policy. All right, that's pretty specific. Is that from a question or something that you specifically are picking that time period? I mean, it's not a problem. I'm just curious what motivated it. To be honest, there's a lot more on Japan that era than Korea in that era, to be fair. All right, if you guys want to add stuff, you feel free to add stuff, okay? That's fine. So let's go ahead and begin. And you want political. Okay, that's fine. That's no problem. Political and foreign. Let me get the sort of the 800-pound gorilla out of the way. There's a lot of rumors going on online that there are people in East Asia, likely China, Korea, something like that, leaking English versions of the exam hours before the test begins. So basically, they get a version of the test hours ahead of you guys, obviously, because of the way time zones work. So in theory, if Japan is like, just make it up, if Japan is like, I don't know how many hours they are ahead, 15 hours ahead, let's just say that's the number, okay? If they're 15 hours ahead, theoretically, they could take the test, complete the test, and get out in time to tell everybody about the test, right? That's the issue there. Now, traditionally, they have had a separate exam altogether. So even if they tried that, it wouldn't really mean much or do anything. But from what my students in macro were telling me, is that they saw some of these TikTok posts and they claim after the fact that their first page on their macro test was in fact the same first page that was being passed around as the macro exam. These people are offering to sell the test. These people are offering, you give us X amount of dollars, we'll give you a copy of the test, we'll give you the answer key. Let's pretend for a moment that that's true. Let's pretend for a moment that you can go to some sketchy person on Discord and be like, hey man, here, where do I send my Venmo? Where do I send my, could that cause a cancellation of the test? I mean, anything's possible. Look, here's my point. At this point of the year, I'm going to tell you a deep, dark secret you don't know. But I'm going to tell it to you. Your grade is already calculated. What do I mean by that? The person you are right now, taking this test right now, you might have done a little bit bad or a little bit good on the practice quizzes we've done. But the simple truth is, there isn't a whole lot that's going to change between now and Wednesday morning. There just isn't. What gets you your grade is the work you've put in all year long. That's what's determining your grade. It's not what happens in the last 36 hours here. What these are ways to put things into your brain that either you're not sure about, you only learned through the reading, we only covered in a very basic way, or I think you could have gotten away with it without really knowing it. And this is me here offering you a chance to study in a way that doesn't require you to sit silently and do it. So in many ways, this is a study session in which I am assisting you. You guys need to stop worrying about this test getting canceled. It ain't going to get canceled. It's not going to happen. They'd have to cancel hundreds of thousands of tests around the world. It ain't going to happen. All right? Even if these tests are leaked and real, remember, your grade is your business. So just do well. That's it. Don't sit there, the tests are leaked, whatever. Don't be looking for answers. Even if I had the answer key and I offered it to you, you should tell me no. You should tell me no, because the moment you are trying to find a shortcut at this point of the year, you have literally wasted part of your life. I mean, you have wasted it. You've spent all this time doing things you didn't have to do, taking on challenges you didn't have to do. No matter what your grade is at this point, wouldn't you rather know, hey, I did X and I got Y, and it's clean. It's clean. It's not soiled by anything. It's something you could say, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, whatever it is, it's mine. And there's something to be said about that. Even when it's a failure, there's something to be said about that. Now, I don't think a person with the right mindset who's put in legitimate effort all year is going to get it less than a 3 on this test. I really don't think so. But only you can determine that. So if these next 36 hours are anything, they're a chance for you to make sure your mind's in the right place. That you are walking in that test with a purpose, with a goal. And that goal is to do well enough. Well enough for who? Not for me. Understand, you get a 1, you get a 5. I'm going to be proud of you either way. You did something no one else had to do. You did something a lot of your friends picked up and walked away. They didn't want nothing to do with it. So don't worry about that part. Don't worry about being, bothering me, upsetting me. That's the wrong metric, man. The metric is do good enough for yourself. What is the number you want to hit? What is the number you think is realistic? What is the number you will go to sleep at night feeling satisfied with? And if you worked your butt off all year and you feel like, man, you really had to stretch to do anything, and a 2 is the best you can do and you get a 2, great. But I think everybody in the class can get a 3. I really do. So from here on out, it's about whether or not you think you can do it yourself. You have to do that. So don't worry about your refunds. Stop thinking weak. Stop thinking small. Let's get going. All right, Dar al-Islam. What is Dar al-Islam? So I'm going to zoom in here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to bold. And I hate Arial. It's like the worst font. Let's do something. Yeah, man. Boom. All right. Dar al-Islam. Dar al-Islam literally means the house of submission to the will of God. So, the word Islam actually means submission to the will of God, if you translate it technically. Most people just think it means peace, because the Arabic word salam, which is derived from Islam, means peace. So, the house of peace or the house of Islam, or the house of the submission to the will of God. These are all terms that mean the same basic thing. And what they mean is the world ruled by Islam. That's what it means. The part of the world that has fallen into and come under the domain of Islam. Remember that Islam is more than just a religion. Unlike every other religion, really this is true, no other religion is this the case. Every other religion, at least major world religions we study, their personal journeys about you. Buddhism doesn't have a built-in mission of conquest. Christianity doesn't have a built-in mission of conquest. Islam does. Islam is unique. It was started by a warlord. And if you have to write anything at all about the Ottomans, about the Safavids, about the Mughals, about gunpowder empires, about anything related to Islam, and you need to write about context, the context that Islam is unique in the world, in that its founder was both a merchant, a king, and a warlord. Like, that is unique. Jesus led no armies. Jesus conquered no peoples. Like, really, that's important. You can do a lot with that in writing. That is well beyond the beginnings of the course. It is automatically evidence beyond the documents. FYI, for what it's worth, I don't know if people realize this, evidence beyond the documents does not have to be within the scope of the course's dates. It doesn't have to be 1200 to whatever modern day. It could be ancient history. It could be history that informs about the current situation. So if you have some gunpowder empire situation, and it's, some Islamic ruler claiming rulership, blowing somebody up, engaging in warfare, threatening warfare, man, hit him with that. Well, guess what, man? Muhammad set this precedent day one because he was a merchant turned warlord turned king. That's what he was. He conquered his way around Arabia and subjugated these people to his will. And then after he died, most of them, remember, tried to break away from Islam, figuring, well, the boss is dead. We didn't want this funny religion anyway. And then the first caliph, Abu Bakr, he turns around and reconquers them all again. So Islam was formed in war. Make no mistake about it, it was formed in war. So because it was formed in war, and because Muhammad set the mission very clearly, make the world Islam was basically the mission, there's a social project here. And that's why it always had the singular idea of a caliph, someone whose job it was to be the successor, to carry on the mission of Islam. So the world ruled by Islam is the world of Dar al-Islam. This is versus the Dar al-Harb. I think it's Harb. Hold on, let me check it. Dar al... Do I have that right? Dar al-Harb. Yep, I'm right. The Dar al-Harb, this is the world of war. Meaning, this is the part of the world that is not yet under the dominion of Islam. Or, if you want to sort of take a moderner spin to it, it's the part of the world where Islam is not tolerated. Okay? So, these are the areas where, in theory, every Muslim is sort of pledged to change the Dar al-Harb into the Dar al-Islam. Like, that is the ultimate mission of the religion. So, that's what it is. Does that mean they will agree, believe in bloodshed, warfare, and conquest? No. I mean, conversion efforts, whatever it might be. And obviously, every individual Muslim doesn't think, all right, today I got to go out there and make 5 more Muslims or I'm not doing my job. Like, that's not the case, right? Obviously, people are people. But I'm talking about from a philosophical sort of core elements of their faith. Just like Christianity has core elements. Okay. Who is RXMM, and they should identify themselves rapidly or get kicked. So, well, they got 5 seconds before I just boot their ass. So, the realities, it's the leaker. Sam, that's actually pretty funny. You made me laugh. So anyway, if he's offering it for sale, don't buy. So that's the Dar al-Islam and the Dar al-Harb. Okay, so that's what those terms just basically mean. They're very old terms. Now, in relation to the Ottomans, so let me do it this way, because I saw a question about the Abbasids, gunpowder empires. Let's just kind of roll through them. Okay, here is the order of operations for Islam, right? So at first there is pre-Islamic Arabia. I'm not capitalizing. Sorry, I'm just not. Okay, and this is and then next, then comes Muhammad's rule. Now I'm simplifying, right? He shows up from this desert trip. Hey, I got visited by an angel. Tries to convert people. They try to kill him. He flees, heads to Medina. Yeah, 3, same place. becomes the leader, leads an army, defeats Mecca. Like, I skipped a lot there, okay, but he's now in charge. Muhammad's rule, and then Muhammad's death. Remember, there is no correct way to spell Muhammad really in English, so don't get hung up on that, all right? Just like something that's basically correct is fine. So, Muhammad's rule, Muhammad's death. After his death, you've got the Ridda Wars. The Ridda Wars were Abu Bakr has to reunify Islam. This is right after Muhammad dies. He has to lead an Islamic army loyal to Muhammad and Muhammad's vision and reconquer all of Arabia, basically, okay? After he's gone, you've got the other caliph. So he's like, so really at that point you can call it, like once he wins, you've got the rightly, well, the Rashidun, we call it, the rightly guided caliphs in Islam. This is Umar, Uthman, and then finally Ali. Remember, they're all assassinated, right? Umar is assassinated, Uthman's assassinated, Ali's assassinated. We know this. Here's another Islamic tip. If you have to write about Islam, core problem of Islam. All right. That person just got kicked. So I don't know who that is, but they gone. So, the, threw my whole train of thought off. Sorry, so, they're all assassinated. So a core element of Islam, for sure, is the idea that they have never been able to figure out the leadership struggle in Islam. Remember, Muhammad left these rules while he was alive, but he took over as an old man, and one of the things he never really settled is who runs Islam, right? Is it hereditary? Well, he has no sons. Is it his son-in-law, Ali? Remember the Sunni-Shia conflict? We might as well talk about that while we're at it here. So those are the Rashidun. And then finally, after that, there is the assassination of Ali by the Umayyads, which I definitely spelled something wrong here. There you go. By the Umayyads, who then rule as a hereditary dynasty. Okay? They do that until they themselves are overthrown by the Abbasids. The Abbasids rule until the Mongols destroy them. And that's the end of unified Islam until the Gunpowder Empire. So that's, I mean, that's way too simple. I'm taking really complex stuff and I just, like, flew through it. But all this stuff happens basically before the course starts. All right? No. So the Seljuks are not the same as the Mongols. The Seljuks were, all right, there's a lot of nomadic Central Asian peoples that are Muslim. Okay? A lot. The Turks in general, which they're not all Seljuk Turks, but the Turks in general, some of which are Seljuks and others, how did they all get to be Islam? You may recall very early in the course we talked about how the Tang dynasty got into a war in Central Asia with the Umayyads. Okay? Sure, Jillian. With the Umayyads. And so what then happened, the Tang lost and the Umayyads won. And basically most of the Silk Road came under Umayyad control, and that meant most of the religious exposure in Central Asia was, in fact, Islamic instead of saying Buddhist or something like that. This is why you have the Uyghurs in China. They're all Muslims. And because these wars were won by the Muslims, not the Chinese. Now, ever since then, Allah's nomads are both Muslim, but that doesn't mean they have any allegiance to the peoples of settled Islamic world. So they're still nomadic warriors who want to raid and take over and make monies, etc. So the Seljuks are just one of those groups that help to break up chunks of the Islamic Empire. Like, I make the Abbasids sound like they ruled until, like, a drop-dead date. It's not really what happened. The Abbasids really kind of lost control of their political power and were ruled by other states. And then a lot of chunks of the Abbasid Empire broke away and became little, like, sort of vassal states of the Abbasids, but basically were independent. I don't want to get too deeply into that stuff because, again, it's kind of pre the course anyway. But the Mongol era basically disrupts all of the world. I mean, especially anything east of Europe and east of Africa. In terms of Asia and Eastern Europe and Eastern Eurasia, Asia Minor, they just disrupt everything. Now, once the Mongols either assimilate into the places they've conquered, because we said it's kind of hard to be a horse nomad warrior from the Russians, from the Siberian steppe lands, if you're not near horses in the Siberian steppe lands. Like, it's just hard to do it. So once that sort of settles, the emerging Islamic powers that develop from roughly, you can kind of put a number on it, 1300 to say, depending on which one you're talking about, you can go up to 18 really, is the gunpowder empires. Now, they're not all lasting that long, okay? The most prominent, the most important of them, without any doubt, are the Ottomans. The Ottomans defeat the Byzantines in 1453, or at least they finish off the Byzantines in 1453, and from that point forward, their empire grows into a Mediterranean empire. North Africa, pretty much all the way up until almost to Spain. They conquer almost all the Middle East, much of the Greek world, much of the Balkan states are all under Ottoman control. They're a powerful land empire at a time when the world is starting to transition. Remember, it's 1453. Not too long after this, Europeans are going to say enough of that noise, and they're going to go try to sail to the very places they're trying to get to. So the Ottomans are actually a little bit late to the game. They're a powerful empire, and they're going to last for 400 years. But part of the reason they last for so long is because the world has turned its attention away from large empires on land. The Ottomans do it, as well as their rivals. So their rivals are the Safavids. So the Safavids, remember, were Shia, meaning that they believed that the rightful caliph of Islam could only be a bloodline descendant of Ali, that nobody else was allowed or justified in being the leader of Islam, whereas almost every other Islamic state is Sunni. So this was a big deal because, again, the moment you're Shia and you're a ruler of a Shia state, you by definition have declared war with every Muslim on planet Earth who doesn't buy into your rule. Because if you are the chosen one of Islam and you are the proper caliph, your job, like your actual holy mission, is to establish your control over all of Islam, to bring the Dar al-Islam to the actual rest of the world, to turn the Dar al-Harb into the Dar al-Islam. This is your job. So, again, it didn't work out for the Safavid rulership. We remember, if you would, that they're crunched between the Ottomans. All right, I don't know how this is going to look on a camera. I'm doing it my way. The Ottomans are in the west, the Safavids in the middle, and then the... All right. Excuse me a second. Alright, so I don't know who that user is, but that user just got reported for harassment, selling illegal goods, and spamming and bullying. So that person is maybe losing their YouTube account or Google account in the process. Please don't screw around on my channel with this nonsense, okay? Thank you. Okay. So, anyway, the Safavids are in the middle. The Ottomans are to the west, and then the Mughals are to the east. Now, the Mughals are a weird one, right? So your Mughals, they're weird because they're a Muslim minority ruling a vast Hindu majority in India, all right, obviously. Now, there are some famous Mughals you kind of need to know, and there's some famous Ottomans you kind of need to... Well, not really. There's more famous Mughals. The most famous Mughal is Akbar the Great, which is the stupidest name in human history. The word Akbar means the Great. This guy is literally named the Great, because Europeans don't know anything about this stuff. European historians don't know anything about this stuff. So his real name isn't Akbar, okay? Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. To call him Akbar the Great is to literally call him the Great. They should just call him Akbar. Okay, that's it. It's like Emperor Wu Di. Like, that means Emperor Wu Emperor. It's just dumb. But I'll put Akbar the Great because you're going to see Akbar the Great. Okay, potentially. So Akbar is probably the most famous of the Mughal rulers. Here's the thing: they will test this. They will give you this idea of Mughals and Ottomans rulers being religiously tolerant. And that's basically what they're going to make sure you know. Akbar was a more tolerant of the Mughal rulers, allowing a lot of different faiths and religions to exist, including trying to make his own, which was an utter failure. The Ottomans followed the Islamic peoples of the book traditions, the dhimmi, where you can practice within their domain as a monotheist, a Christian, or a Jew, and generally be relatively not harassed. You don't have the same rights as a Muslim. You have to pay special taxes. There are restrictions on that stuff. You may remember the Pact of Umar sets the rules for that. That's another great outside information piece I had you read in your summer assignment all the way back then. So if you can, if there's a Muslim essay of any kind, any empire, and you want to bring up, the way that these guys treated non-Muslims was really dictated by the Pact of Umar. Boom, that's great outside information. So stuff like that. It may shock you to realize that I actually have planted some pretty important seeds throughout the entire year of sort of bits and pieces of information that we did in depth, specifically because they give you a wide variety of information to discuss should the ability or the need or the opportunity arise. So everything from which modern company in Hong Kong is a multi-billion dollar international corporation that started as drug smugglers. Why did I teach you that? Because it's the kind of story you're not going to forget. And it could be useful as outside evidence. It could be useful as context. It could be useful as all sorts of things in writing. So, you're welcome. All right, so that's your Mughals, your Ottomans, except Jardine Matheson. That's right, thank you. Mughals and Ottomans, Akbar, I spelled minority wrong. Hold on, that annoys me. I hate spelling things wrong. Boom, 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 boom. Don't be lazy like me. I'm typing to get this done. Capitalize the things that are supposed to be capitalized. Hindus are capitalized. Peoples from their nations are capitalized. China, Indian, whatever, Muslim, they're capitalized. Okay, please be do that stuff. Be sensitive to it. I'm just thinking if there's anything else I really should cover about it before I move on. In terms of themes, things you get asked, that kind of stuff. You may, if you were going to get a document from the Ottomans, what kind of documents would you get? And of course, documents can appear on multiple choice, SAQs, they can appear anywhere. The most likely things would be like Suleiman the Lawgiver from the Ottomans, which doesn't mean you need to know who his name is. It's just like you might get a document of him and his law code for the Ottoman Empire. He was one of the more effective Ottoman rulers. You might get from the Mughals. You might get something from Akbar, potentially, or his son, Aurangzeb. I'm spelling that wrong for sure. Hang on. Aurangzeb. Zeb with an E. That was close. Now, Akbar was more tolerant than Aurangzeb, but both of them ended up fighting and shooting and blowing up Hindu strongholds in South India. But generally, history kind of remembers, unfairly, mind you, Akbar is the more tolerant ruler and Aurangzeb is kind of the more hardline Muslim cracking down on the Hindus. That's not really totally fair, but that is often the narrative. So don't be surprised if you see that. Do you need to know these people? No. I'm just saying these are names that might come up. I'm not expecting you to write anything about them, know anything about them. I'm just telling you they might come up, okay? All right, let's move on to the next topic. Riley, if that wasn't good enough, please let me know what you'd like me to do. I can't believe you only put your initials for your name on the AP exam. Well, I know whose AP exam that is, but do not do that. All right? I don't know what that does to the test. You better put your full name. All right? But don't be writing no initials. Okay. Latin American independence, post-colonialism. Okay, Haitian Revolution. All right, let's talk Latin America. Okay. Now, what the hell is Latin America, first off? Real simple. South of USA. That's Latin America. That's bottom line. That's it. You go to Mexico South, all that's considered Latin America in this course. Even South America is considered Latin America. Why? Where does the name come from? Latin America is the idea of the peoples conquered by Latin-speaking Europeans. Now, what do I mean by that? So there are Latin languages, right, in Europe. English is not a Latin language. German is not a Latin language. Anything that's descended from Latin, the Roman language, is considered a Latin language, or sometimes they're called Romance languages. So, for example, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, probably a few others I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but those are the main ones, okay? So, since Spanish and Portuguese peoples conquered Mexico South, we call that Latin America. The idea of a Latino, for example, really is a very weird term. I've never quite understood the logic of it, because it implies that these are people who, speak Latin languages? Like, okay. Obviously, it's meant to reference peoples from Latin America, but there's a lot of different people in Latin America. So let's talk about a couple of things. First off, how did Latin America become Latin America? Let's remember that there are two major peoples that were here, right, before Europeans got here. The Aztec Empire and the Inca Empire. The Aztecs were central Latin America in Mexico, and then the Inca were in Peru along the... in what is roughly, their empire stretched along the Andes mountain range. So basically Peru, modern-day Chile, and places like that, okay? So, just remember that these people are they're a Stone Age technology when Europeans have steel, horses, and early gunpowder weapons. That's a huge difference, right? So that's a big advantage to Europeans. But never forget the most important, the deadliest weapon in the European arsenal. So what was the deadliest weapon that Europeans brought with them in their conflicts with the Aztecs and the Incas in the period of colonization? Like the Columbus era, the Pizarro disease, very good. Disease, right? Pathogens. All right, the specifically smallpox would be the most important and most deadly, but disease by far. Disease will kill up to 80 to 90% of all native peoples in the South and Latin America within 180, something like that, years of European arrival. So it doesn't happen like overnight, but to have 90% of the people in your world die over the course of, say, 2 generations is pretty wild stuff. There's a reason why all these people now are heavily Christian. Like today, Latin America, South America, some of the most Christianized places on planet Earth. Deep, actual Christian roots there. It's obviously Spanish, Portuguese speaking, depending on where you go. Why? Well, a big part of it is their culture. A culture can't survive a 90% depopulation. No culture can. Nothing can survive a 90% depopulation. So they're just wrecked and totally wrecked. And so in the absence of the actual manpower necessary to carry on their culture, and also being dominated and defeated by Europeans in general here and then controlled, it's no surprise that their culture is utterly subsumed. I don't mean erased, I mean subsumed. It just becomes built into local culture, a part of this new European culture that now takes over. Now, there's a couple of sort of big changes that European conquest brings here, okay? And all these things are post-1200s. This is all part of the course, okay? So first off, let's kind of do it from the following aspects. Political, economic, religious, social, intellectual, sure, geographic. Yeah, why not? Okay. So let's do these changes. Okay, so first off, politically. The most important political change of Europeans arriving in the New World is the caste system, or in general, racial political classes. So, are you able to share this document with us? Well, here's the secret trick. YouTube saves the video, so just play back the video. Mostly because I do not think my scratch typed out without my commentary means anything. It's literally my mental diarrhea on paper. I would not assume that it means anything without the context of me describing what I'm doing. So I would just replay the video personally. All right, so the caste system. These are racial political classes. This is how white are you and where were you born, how mixed blood are you and what mixture of which bloods, and so on. The most important issue, and this will play big into Latin American revolutions and independence, the most important issue is the Peninsulares versus the Creoles. You should know who they are. These are all white people of Spanish heritage, all of them. The difference is Peninsulares are white Spaniards born on the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain. So if you go look at the European map, I always felt like Spain jutting out of Europe almost looked like a face profile to me. It always has looked like that to me growing up. So that is a big landmass surrounded by water on three sides, that or all sides but one. That's a peninsula. So the Peninsulares are the whites from the peninsula. They're born there. The Creoles are whites born in the New World. There is no other difference between them. So if Jack and Jill go up a hill and have a baby in Madrid, Spain, that's a Peninsulare. If they have a baby in Mexico City, that's a Creole. That's it. There's no difference. In fact, it was totally possible, for example, for Jack and Jill to have their first child in Spain and their second child in Mexico, and one's a Peninsulare and one's a Creole. Over time, this will cause resentment. The Creoles will come to resent the fact that despite being racially as pure as every other white in the colonies, the special privileges given to Peninsulares do not extend to them. That said, every other person in these colonies, every other racial demographic, and the caste system has 100 different breakdowns. If you remember, I showed you that image of like, here's a white guy and a white woman and they have a white baby. Here's a white guy and an Indian woman and they have an Indian half-white baby. And like, they have this all listed almost like playing cards, like it's baseball cards, you know. Here's your mulatto card. Like, literally, that's what they had. So, they remember that everybody who's not a white views the whites as whites. This is also an important part of the Latin American revolutions. So even though these two groups distinguish themselves and they have these like squabbles about whether or not they're getting their proper rights, please remember that for everybody else, the white people are white people. Like, there's no way to tell who is a Creole, who is a Peninsulare, just by looking at them. There just isn't. And the rest of the population doesn't really care that the one group of rich, well-dressed whites are mad at the other group of rich, well-dressed whites. Because for everybody else, these two are on the top, and they enjoy special privileges and special powers. And that was true. Even though the Creoles were second, there was a big gap between first, second, and everybody else. Please keep that in mind, because there's a lot of tensions, and Latin America is not a singular story. So that's an important piece, okay? Economics. The first economic system in Latin America is the encomienda system, which was simply, it basically means the economy. That's what the word means, okay? So what is it? They were plantation style farming with conquistador landowners called encomenderos, and these guys ran and owned, I definitely spelled that wrong, thank you, these guys ran and owned their encomiendas. So basically think of it like a Southern American plantation. You've got basically the idea. Who are the labor? Well, the labor are local natives, are the labor. And they are not slaves exactly, but they're basically agricultural serfs. So they are a form of coerced labor. Remember, coerced labor just means you're laboring without total free will over your labors. You're not necessarily choosing to labor. It's just without total free will. Okay? So these people are often getting paid, and they do often have an income from their work, but they also have rights, restrictions. They have to do the work, etc., etc., etc. If you happen to own other assets, for example, they could be fishing, they could be doing lumber, where they're cutting down trees, they could be doing mining. Depending on the assets on the encomienda, they could be doing something other than farming. But in general, they're farming plantations. And for the most part, this is the most profitable part of the New World, especially in the beginning, is going to be cash crops. So you should have a sense of those cash crops. Things like tobacco, sugar was probably the biggest, cotton, corn, although not really a cash crop at this time, but that is a grain crop that they eat. But, you know, there, tobacco, I think I said, there are a number of these. But sugarcane, tobacco, cotton, those are probably your biggest ones, okay? And that's how the economy works. Now, that system eventually does break down, and it just doesn't seem to work anymore. And then the Spaniards do eventually, the Spanish government sends an actual viceroy, which just means a vice king. Roy means king. A governor, basically, to run the colony of New Spain. Remember, Brazil was actually taken over by the Portuguese. Brazilians, as a result, speak Portuguese, not Spanish. Their people are descended from Portuguese rule. The details of that don't really matter right now, but it's going to matter later in the course why Portugal's king, for example, flees to Brazil. Like, why did they do that? So that's that. Religious, again, the more or less the total dominance of Catholic Christianity. I mean, pretty much totally, with the exception of the adoption of certain elements of local religion. For example, see Dia los Muertos, right? Day of the Dead. Yeah. So the Day of the Dead is a great example of a local religious custom. The Aztecs and Incas both had something like a death cult where they were quite obsessed with apocalyptic end of the world sort of worship in their gods, leading to human sacrifice and things like that. So the idea that skulls and death symbology and things like that might factor into their religious practices and wouldn't go away so quickly and easily, this was basically true. So even now, there is, like, for example, in Mexico, some people worship Saint Death, which is literally like the Virgin Mary with a skull face instead of being, a human. And you'll see this kind of stuff. You can even buy candles to Saint Death and all these other things. It's a mixture of that kind of religion tradition that was local and kind of blends in with Catholicism. And if you're a Catholic and you're a priest, let's say, or a missionary, it's not the kind of thing you're going to quickly correct because it's so built into the culture of the local people. Better to have a 95% of the way there Catholic than to try to force that last 5% and maybe lose a convert. So in general, these things have just persisted over time. They're just durable elements of the culture. So if you need a continuity, an example like that is a continuity, where somebody is able to go in and say, okay, remember what continuities are as a general skill in the course. Continuities are not this stayed the same. That's boring and duh. Continuities are, despite the fact that goddamn near everything on planet Earth changes over time, this didn't. It resisted the overwhelming tides of change that make up history. So that's a continuity. That's really something that has just withstood the test of time. So absolutely keep that. So for example, I'll use myself. I've lost my hair since I was younger. Whatever, I'm an older guy, so a million physical changes for being older, etc., etc. But my accent has been this way since I was a kid. I talk like this. There's nothing I'll be able to do about this. So evidence for continuity. Well, evidence for continuity, Ray, is done by describing how or why something resisted change. That's the right way to do it. Right, now I'm saying that. So instead of saying changes, this was before, this was after, right? Imagine like all the diet commercials, right? Or whatever, the TikTok commercials. Before or after, right? That's change. Continuity is, despite that change, what resisted change? What was the thing that probably should have changed, but notably didn't? So I'll give you an example from history. Throughout all the crap that went on in China's history, the basic model of government, a complex bureaucracy run by an emperor who is built upon a Confucian society, has persisted. Has persisted. It is only in the most modern days of history that has been broken for a lengthy period of time. And to be honest, there's been plenty of times in Chinese history where that was broken for even sometimes a couple hundred years and then returns to it. Nothing says China won't have an emperor again in 100 years. There's nothing that says it won't happen. And, if you were a betting person, you might say, well, it's happened many, many times in the past. That's a continuity, all right? A change is something like the Han don't rule and have a civil service exam that's exactly the same as what the Song implement, which don't have a civil service exam, which is exactly the same as what goes on in the Communist Party today. But the idea that the most important jobs in society are working for government was true under the Han, true under the Tang, true under the Song, and is still true today under the single-party communist dictatorship that runs China. Government jobs, working for the government, is still the most prestigious and profitable jobs. With some very rare exceptions in the modern day of some private business people in China who do very well. But even they are subject to the will of government. So that's how you do continuity. You talk about the thing that could have changed or should have changed but simply didn't. All right. Socially, make no mistakes. It's whites versus everyone else. I don't mean that in the sense that, like, it's a race war. It's not. Just that there is a class of upper class peoples, and that's everyone else. Serfdom will not be directly on the AP exam. I can't. Well, maybe Russian serfdom might. Russian serfdom could be. But European medieval serfdom? I mean, that's not true. It could be in the very early parts of the exam. I would say probably not European, because it's an AP Euro thing. Not because it doesn't fit the time scale, it's just AP Euro. But serfdom in Russia, just remember, serfdom is one of several forms of coerced labor. So is slavery, so is indentured servitude, so is a number of things. Just keep in mind that coerced labor can take many forms. Serfdom is simply one of them, and you'll probably be fine. Intellectually, there's going to be the introduction of European values, and specifically the Enlightenment is going to be a big deal when it comes to revolution. And then geographic, what I would just point out is don't forget the impact of the silver mines of Potosi, which is just very important because of their economic impact on the rest of the world, okay? So, let's talk about Latin American independence then. I'm not going to type a lot, so pay attention because there's a lot of stuff. If I could summarize, well, if I could spell, if I could summarize this in sort of a simple way, it goes like this. The Napoleonic Wars so badly disrupted communication and rule with the New World that both Spain and Portugal would eventually lose control of their new, let's not call them that, Latin American colonies. That's basically the summary. Now, how did that happen? So, remember Napoleon defeated every continental nation of Europe or subjugated them. Most notably, Spain and Portugal were both beaten by the by Napoleon. In the process of which, this meant that the kings, rulers, queens, etc. of these states were replaced by Napoleon's own family. Now, in theory, because Napoleon conquered these people, that should have meant that the colonies that they owned would now be Napoleon's. But Napoleon didn't have a lasting leadership in these countries for any real length of time. I mean, he ruled his lifetime, but it's not like he ruled for 20, 30 years after he conquered. He really didn't. He was engaged in ongoing warfare. And a lot of Europe was not fully and yet under his control. In the process of this, the colonies begin to resist the presence of French/Bourbon/ other non-Spanish rule. Now, it's a complicated story in a lot of places because there were Creoles and there were Peninsulares in the New World who did not want to see the old system abolished. Because even though the Creoles were a little salty about the lack of rights they had compared to Peninsulares, they weren't stupid. They understood that silver medals are better than no medals. And they were quite understanding that the rest of the peoples in the New World were likely to eat them up if there was any real social change. So to just suddenly turn around and be like, let's be independent, let's make a democracy, that doesn't necessarily work in their favor, okay? These were wealthy people who didn't want to see their wealth end. That's an old story, by the way, the idea that the wealthy segment of the lowest classes is the ones that are going to demand their rights, and often they don't care what happens to the poor people. It's often true. We saw that in the French Revolution, for example. But, so this is basically a disruption that the Europeans were never able to recover from. Even after the fact of Napoleon being defeated and new Spanish monarchs coming into the throne, crazy stuff has happened. So, for example, Napoleon's forces marched on Portugal. And in doing that, the Crown Prince of Portugal fled Portugal and went to Brazil. And after Portugal was defeated by Napoleon, he declared Brazil to be the new center of the Portuguese Empire and ruled from Brazil. So for a while, the actual crown government of Portugal, was ruling from Brazil. When Napoleon's eventually defeated and the Spanish monarchs and the Portuguese monarchs are put back on their thrones, that Portuguese heir to the Portuguese throne basically declares that he no longer has an interest in ruling Portugal itself and declares Brazil to be his kingdom, separate from his father's kingdom or his uncle's kingdom. I forget exactly which relative of his was ruling, and they break away that way. Mexico sees a slightly different pattern. That pattern, by the way, is that pattern I described is kind of similar to the rest of South America, where just the disruption of European contact basically meant that they were effectively on their own anyway. So they started to rule themselves. Like, they kind of had to for about a decade because of the Napoleonic Wars. And on top of that, even then, remember, the British Navy had disrupted all trade, more or less, between Napoleon, his Spanish fleets, and whatever he had east and west. Remember that the Haitians also rebel in this time, bring up the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian slaves rebel at this time. The world's first, as far as I can tell, only successful slave revolt, which led to a complete overthrow of the Spanish-owned colonies of Haiti, and more or less killed any attempt Napoleon had of maintaining a fleet in the Atlantic Ocean, in the western parts of the Atlantic Ocean. This is what, remember, led to the Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon turns around and needs money for the war effort, figures he's never going to see Haiti ever again. He might as well give up his holdings that he had won in battle with Europeans in the New World and sold us the Louisiana Territory, because he technically owned it after owning France and owning Spain. So anyway, trying to make this simple as I can. In Latin America, that was basically the pattern. The disruption by Napoleon's armies and the Napoleonic Wars led to these people basically being on their own for about a decade. And after that, the tensions are so real that they never come back together. There are Spanish armies led by actual Spanish generals sent from Spain post-Napoleon into the New World to reconquer and reintegrate the Spanish colonies back into Spain's empire. These are failures. There's a lot of fighting. It's many years of fighting and bloodshed. At some points, these armies win. At some points, they lose. But in the end, they do, in fact, lose. And the Latin American states that are left declare independence from Spain as their victory over Spanish forces in the New World. In Mexico, it's slightly different. Mexico has a lot of internal revolutions from their peasantry. This is not the same in Latin America, in Central and South America. South America and Central America is mostly Creole-led armies who are fighting against actively the Spanish forces that are invading. And this kind of unifies South Americans, both Creole and even Peninsulare, and the common, mixed blood natives against these Spanish armies. But in Mexico, not so much. In Mexico, instead, there is a lot of popular uprisings against the Mexican viceroyalty that runs the show. And the Creoles end up kind of being in a standoff in the Peninsulares with these people. And eventually, there are military leaders that emerge that start to seize control of the country, and that's the story of Mexican revolutionary times. So the basic theme is Mexico, more of a popular revolt. South America and Latin America, around Central America, places like that, Guatemala and so on, typically a Creole set of revolts against the old countries of Spain. And then Brazil's this weird little duck where it declared independence from its own country, basically, after its crown prince fled there and said, this is nicer than Portugal, the hell with Portugal, and they stayed in Brazil. So that's the 30-second, 60-second, 120-second independence of Latin America. What else we got here? Indian Ocean trade. So Indian Ocean trade is going to go like this. If they will ask about it. It will be there. Remember that it's a complement to the Silk Roads at first. By 1450, it is once the Mongols have established power. Shortly after that is when you're going to see Indian Ocean trade dominate. And it's partly because the Mongols, although they managed to establish peace, along those trade routes come disease and things like that on the Silk Road, whereas the technologies, the ship technologies that are able to be developed in 1450 onward are just so good that, frankly, they're able to just move goods much faster, even around Africa and things like that, than the Silk Road could ever manage. And of course, realistically, think about this: how much can you really carry on a pack of camels that are following you behind, compared to loading up the hull of a ship? Right? It's the scale and volume are just totally different. So the Indian Ocean Trade Network just simply becomes far more important over time. Remember that it's reliant upon monsoon winds. It has seasonal trade. You don't really want to sail against the winds if you can help it. But regardless, it's a massively important entrepot. You might see that word. You might see that word. That's a word you might see. Entrepot. Entrepot. And I think I spelled that wrong. Yes, I did. There's an E here. Entrepot. An entrepot is basically a center of trade, culture, and diffusion. That's what it is. An entrepot is a place where, like coastal India was full of entrepôts, which were basically these centers, these ports, where all kinds of people trade, mingle, mix, and as a result, they're truly multicultural. All right, those are entrepôts. You might see that word. It's just a fancy word that means basically a trade center, and with it comes syncretism, cultural diffusion, cultural sharing, multiculturalism, things like that. It's just this natural consequence of a bunch of people mixing together. Let's see. Japan and Korea. All right, so basically the story of Japan and Korea from 1750 onwards, as far as this course is concerned, is the story of Japan. And that is what we were talking about basically in class today, this aggressive action by Japan as they conquer their way into Korea in, say, 1935-ish, and then up into Manchuria, and then from there south into China. Basically, Japan had attempted an invasion of Korea during the beginning, right before the Tokugawa shogunate started. It was a massive failure. As a result of that failure, Japanese ambitions to conquer Korea had kind of failed from that point forward. However, the Qing Empire had actually basically, in China, had established Korea as a proper vassal yet again, in that sort of old Chinese tradition where Korea is like the younger brother, little cousin of China. So that's why you haven't heard a lot about China, because they just Korea, they fell under that Qing Dominion, the Manchu Dominion. And they don't really come back into the story until Japan starts to brutalize them during the occupation of Korea and Manchuria. So that's kind of the story there. For Japan, remember, the 1860s bring about the Meiji Restoration, the full integration of an attempt to modernize the country, industrialize the country, backed by powerful former samurai families who give up their swords and pick up their pocketbooks and decide to become businessmen instead. These were known as zaibatsu, these conglomerate corporations. I showed you some of them, like Kawasaki and Sumitomo and Mitsubishi and so on. These corporations that make a bunch of different products, because Japan had so few of these businesses in its early days that every one major business like this, a corporation, would actually make 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different products that are utterly unrelated, right? So, as I said, Sumitomo makes tires, but they also make medical equipment and servers and whatever they might make. So there's a lot of different things that they do. Remember, Japan, to fuel that industrial growth, needs resources. It doesn't have resources. Japan is basically empty of those, so they have to invade. And so they invade Korea with their modernized, mechanized, modern army, World War II era army. They invade Korea, then Manchuria, then China, and occupy large parts of coastal China. They'll then build a Pacific empire out of basically cutting out and cutting off islands that are controlled by various different peoples, many of which were actually U.S. territories at this time. That is why they attacked Pearl Harbor. The idea of attacking Pearl Harbor was to stop America from interfering with their attempts to seize Pacific Islands along the way, which they were able to do. And so at the sort of beginning of World War II, Japan has established a pretty sizable Pacific empire where they've conquered island after island and chunks of mainland China and Taiwan and so on. So this is what Japan had basically accomplished at this time. Let's see. Green Revolution. Okay, Green Revolution is very modern. You're talking 1930s onwards. And it was using the science of hormones, GMOs, pesticides in crop yields in poor countries. And remember, we've been through this. The ability to say, I'm going to eat non-GMO, I'm going to eat organic, I'm going to eat free range, I'm going to eat, whole food, I'm going to eat farm to table. This is a rich person's privilege, okay? If you're in a part of the world where there is a substantial starvation, where people simply are not able to get enough food to eat, the solution to that is, first and foremost, not the quality of the food, but the quantity of the food. And the Green Revolution is all about revolutionizing agriculture through the manipulation of science, genetic engineering, hormones, etc., to do exactly that. So yes, it does include damaging pesticides. It does include injecting cows with hormones. It does include fertilizers meant to make crops grow larger and in greater abundance than they naturally could do. Sure, those are all true things, 100%. But they do feed people. It does help to prevent some significant amount of starvation in places where that was a problem. So the Green Revolution is one of those things where it's like it's a trade-off, right? It's really, really hard for rich people to tell poor people, hey, you should do the right thing for Mother Nature, and that means your children should starve. That's a really hard position. If you tell people, hey, you know what we got to do? We got to go carbon emission free by 2030. You've condemned a couple of billion people on planet Earth to death and starvation if you do that. Like, you just do. It's an ignorant position. You literally doom billions of people on planet Earth to death, just because that without those polluting technologies like coal, like oil, and so on, they simply cannot even produce enough food to feed themselves. You are throwing them back into the Middle Ages. Not everybody's gonna be able to put together solar panels in the fields of Punjab. Like, it's just not. It's not a educated position. So be careful about things like that, because it's not necessarily a plausible argument to be like, oh yeah, get rid of all pollution by 2030. All right, sure. I mean, if you're willing to kill a couple billion people, go for it. But that's what would be the result of that. So the Green Revolution was the idea that, no, first and foremost, people need to not starve. And that means getting them food, even if it means genetically modifying it. I mean, this was universally praised as a wonderful thing. A lot of the pesticides that would later be banned, like, for example, DDT, which is a pesticide that was sprayed to kill bugs, locusts, anything that might otherwise kill, destroy, or eat crops, were banned for their potential hazardous use or effects they could have on humans. But make no mistake, they were replaced with other products that were, also not exactly like the kind of things that humans should normally eat or consume. But nevertheless, we do, or at least it goes on our crops and we wash our crops potentially. But these things are part of our food supply because they do guarantee a much higher food yield, which means the populations around the world that otherwise might starve don't necessarily have to. So that's what that is about. Gunpowder empires. All right, so I covered everything on the list. Let me see what else got in there. So Riley asked, what are some documents that we absolutely need to know if there are any? That's a good question. I would not say that there is a document of any kind that I would guarantee to be on the test. Rather, I would say, if you're worried about documents, the wise thing to do is to go into the practice multiple choice we've done and really study the different types of documents. Like, start to wake up a little bit and ask yourself, what do they give you? Like, ask the question, what kind of document is this? How often do you get a primary source from somebody who was there at the time telling you what happened or an opinion about something? How many times do you get a secondary source, an article or a professor or a teacher or a researcher or a historian explaining a historical event from their perspective? How often do you get data? How often do you get maps? How often do you get charts? How often do you get political cartoons or propaganda or anything like that? How often? And start to notice that, okay? And then maybe go and look at the last 3 tests you've taken and ask yourself, okay, are there any places on these answer sheets? Now, some of you, as we determined in class today, don't care enough to do these, but I'm hoping you decide to do them tonight. Look at your results. Do you find that when faced with a map, you tend to do better or do worse? When you find that when faced with data, you tend to do better or you do worse? Start to examine where your strengths are. Like, if you have a big, long passage, how do you do on those multiple choice? If you have a short couple of passages or a short passage of a document, how do you do on those multiple choice? You might start to find a pattern. You might start to find that, you know what, you're really not good at maps. Or, you know what, I'm very good at maps, but I really, really, really suck at big, long documents. I must be losing concentration. I can't follow this whole paragraph. Like, that's what you need to be thinking about. That's the way to look at documents. So, no, I would not suggest there's any one document you need to know, but I would suggest you familiarize yourself with the kinds of documents you're presented with and which ones seem to be your strengths and which ones seem to be your weaknesses. And feel free to ask me in class tomorrow if you want to, hey, I'm no good at maps. How would I be better at analyzing maps? I'm no good at analyzing political cartoons. How do I do that? I'm no good at analyzing whatever it might be. And I'm happy to go over that stuff with you guys, either one-on-one or in class with everybody. Okay? Any other questions, issues, or concerns? We've been going for about an hour on the nose, which is always a long bit. We're going to do this again tomorrow night, so don't feel like this is your last opportunity. I will be here again tomorrow night to celebrate our impending victory. All right, well, thank you, Leighton. So if nobody has any questions, I'll hang around for a minute or two just to see if chat sort of quiets down or if the number of viewers drop off significantly, in which case I'll end the live stream. Otherwise, I'll wait. How did Qing China... All right, so that's a good question. So how did Qing China and the Ottoman Empire fall? First off, they fell at around similar times. The Ottomans will last until World War One. And by the time of World War I, they're very small. They kind of have the same fate as the Byzantines that they conquered 400 years before that, which is they were a big empire that just slowly is chipped away. A couple people declared independence, etc. So by the time you get to the Ottoman Empire, quote unquote, of World War I, it's basically Turkey and the eastern coast of Arabia and a little bit of North Africa, and that's basically it. Western coast of Arabia, and that's basically it. So they're defeated in World War One. Their power is stripped. They're allowed to basically keep the country of Turkey as their power base, as their new. You are now the nation of Turkey, and you can rule yourself as you wish. And they actually adopt a Western model for rulership and Western style clothing, education, etc. Thank you, Jillian. I forgot. Thank you. Why didn't I write that down? We'll do that next. And then we have, so that's the end of the Ottomans. And then the British take over and the French take over their territories, including the highly controversial Palestine Mandate, which is British Palestine, where the British own what is today the very areas that people war over. So that was that situation. The other question, hold on, was the Qing. The Qing, remember, basically have their power ended when the Boxer Rebellion fails. The Qing Empress tries to back the Boxers against the Europeans. A multinational European army marches into China, takes the capital of Beijing, and basically forces the Empress to more or less do whatever they want. That does sort of disintegrate, though, because the Europeans pretty quickly don't want to run China. They don't have an interest in that. They want the economics of controlling Chinese trade, but even that kind of dies off. You know, it's not too long after the Opium Wars that Europeans figure out how to grow tea. And they just replace the opium fields in India with tea fields. So we talked about that Darjeeling tea you guys like to make jokes about. Well, Darjeeling used to be the hills where they grew the opium. And it was the best opium on planet Earth because that was where the poppy, the soil quality was the best. The poppy plants grew the most robust, and their sap produced the strongest drugs. So if you want to get really cranked out, Darjeeling opium was the way to go. Well, Europeans realized, well, if it's good for growing opium, it'll probably be good for growing tea. And that is why the hills of Darjeeling today are considered the premier growing spot of tea on planet Earth. Darjeeling tea is the world's most expensive tea, as we talked about. So the Europeans just simply cut out the drugs. Remember, the goal was never to sell drugs. The goal was, we want the tea. And when they figure out, wait a minute, we can just grow our own tea here, once they stole enough tea bushes to do that, then they were able to do it. And they didn't need Europeans they didn't need China for the tea trade anymore. At that point, China became about other things, other access, other trades. But that all falls apart, really, as Europeans turn inwards in the lead up to World War I. And, of course, remember, in the late 1800s, Europeans are far more concerned with Africa than they are with China at that point. So the Qing Empire falls apart in basically a kind of like a revolution that ends up in a very short-lived democracy that then breaks down into warlord fighting until basically the Japanese come in, and then there's a civil war between the communists and the nationalists, and eventually by the mid-1940s you have communist China winning. Asante and Zulu kingdoms. So these are southern African, black African militaristic kingdoms. Both the Asante and the Zulus are considered to be complex civilizations with a militaristic background and a military structure in their people. You can kind of think of them as somewhat analogous to the Aztec in that they're both kind of behind the curve on Europeans technologically, but also have a strict military culture. The Zulus are most well known because they had a few successful battles against Europeans in the era of, say, the Boer Wars. But in the end, you're not going to be asked very much about them. The truth of the matter is that they are kind of a stepping stone on the road to apartheid in South Africa that eventually emerges. They are most notable for having a flash-in-the-pan series of military victories, but in the end are simply destroyed actually relatively easily, all things considered. From the sort of scale of history, these were not particularly difficult fights for Europeans to win. They well outclassed these African armies by this era. So I'd say that largely that's the biggest part of it. Just the idea that they're complex societies that resisted European integration, European rule, and European colonialism will probably be the extent of what you're asked to know, if that. So that would be that. Anybody else have any other stuff to discuss? I'll give it like a silent 15 count in my head. And if nothing else comes up, then I'll sign us out and call it a night. All right. Sounds like that's it. All right, guys. Thanks for stopping in. Do this again tomorrow night. If you haven't done the multiple choice I asked you to do it. I don't know what else to say. Do it. Be as prepared as you can be. Make one thing true. If you want actual advice for the test, this is actual advice. Make it so when you sit for that test, you're as prepared as you could have made yourself. You can't change what went on the last 6, 7, 8 months, but you can decide what happens in the next 36 hours. All right? Sam, don't answer questions for me, please, about whether or not people should do certain things. All right? Even if I agree with your answer, let me answer the questions, okay? I really want you guys to be able to say on Wednesday morning when you sit down to take the test, hey, I've done everything I could do to be ready for this thing. If that's going to be the truth, you'll do fine. And whatever fine is, fine is. If it's a 5, it's a 4, 3, great. I'll be stoked. If it's a 2 and that was your best, I'll be just as proud. But put yourself in a position where you're not failing yourself. Don't worry about anything else. Now, to raise questions, should we go for sourcing in the DBQ? I'll give you 2 answers to that. The answer is no, and the answer is no. It's not that you can't do it. It's that I just don't think it's worth it. I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. Here's the thing. If I had strong convictions that every writer in my class... Let me rephrase the no. If you are somebody who, when you have written for me, tends to get almost all the points... And when we sit and talk about your writing, you get universal praise out of me. Or I tell you, hey, you're really good at this. Like I'm thinking of some people in my head right now who I am talking to. I don't even think they're on the stream, but they might be. But they know who they are because I've been very upfront with them. Like, you are a good writer. This is your skill set. You should absolutely lean into this. In their cases, yes, try to do the sourcing. But the thing with the sourcing is it takes time. And most students don't get it. They don't get it because they forget. They don't get it because they don't quite know what to do. They don't get it because they only do 1 and not 2. Or they do 2 but 1 sucks and therefore they don't get any points for it. So it's really a juice squeeze ratio issue. It's not that you can't do it. It's that if you waste 1 minute failing to get a hard point, and as a result, those minutes could have been spent making sure your context is good, making sure you have evidence beyond the documents, making sure you've sourced everything, making sure you've done as much as you could to connect your thesis and your body paragraphs. If those things are not 100% glued up, shored up, perfect, ready to go. All right, no one's going to be perfect, but as far as you can tell, are the best they're going to get. And you waste a minute chasing down points that you might not get, probably won't get, and hardly anybody gets, that's foolish. It's just bad betting. It's just bad betting. You know, this is a strategy. You have to be strategic on this test. At the end of the day, it's a contest. It's a test. You're not proving how much history you know. You're proving your skill at taking the test. So take the test the smart way. That's my long story short. You should use 5 documents because 4 is necessary for support. So 5 gives you coverage. Look, it's pretty easy to group the documents in a group of 3 and a group of 2. That's your 5. Like, that's the way to plan it out. If you only do 4, you can't mess up any of them or you lose the whole point. And as I've tried to show you in class over the last few days, the standard to getting those points is not particularly hard. You just have to be consistent 4 or 5 times. Like, you have to be consistent. Okay? It's not like one document is hard to do. It's not. It's that you have to do that process 4, 5 times consistently. And if you don't have the extra, the backup, and you do the other 4, and they're all great, except for one's a mess up, you're losing points, and maybe losing a bunch of points. So 5 documents to give you some wiggle room, some safety net, that kind of thing. That's the idea of that. All right? Okay. I'm going to call it there. Not that you don't have more questions. You should. But I want everybody to go home tonight and think about what questions they have, both in class tomorrow and then again when we do our stream. All right? So, and then obviously Wednesday morning, I'll be there very early, and we will, I'll be available from basically, I'm going to plan on 6:40-ish to, till you're called down to the pit. So probably around 7:30, something like that. My class will be open, available, and we can do whatever review you want. Even if there's no review at all, you just want to sit and just unwind and clear your head before the test, that's perfectly fine too. All right, so we're going to end it there, guys. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time. And I'll catch you in class tomorrow night. Ask me tomorrow, Sam. I'm ending the stream for tonight. And we don't call them categories of investigation on the DBQ. We call them grouping of thematics of themes in the documents. And again, the answer is always 2 or 3 groups. All right. Really? Night, guys. Thanks.